All right, I think we're live now. There was like a bit of an error on my end, but it looks like we are live. All right, I'm just going to post this so people know we're live. All right. So we've had a lot of developments today, and it's not often when the market moves this quickly. So when it does, it's a good idea, I think, to sort of talk about what's going on. And in this case, Bitcoin dominance is now finally broken to 56%. You can actually see that it wicked all the way up to 56.34%. This has been something that's been a long time in the making. And here we are. Everyone who's attempted to call the top on Bitcoin dominance for the last 2 years has to go back to sort of the playbook, because it continues to go up. And I think it will continue to go up. And I think it's ultimately headed here to 60% in the not so distant future. All right, so we're going to take a look at a few different things. One of which is, of course, Bitcoin USD. So remember, the thing to look for with Bitcoin USD is if all Bitcoin pairs break down, then it likely means the local top is in. If they haven't broken down, then there's still a chance, right? There's still a chance that Bitcoin could get a pop into the halving, right? I don't know. There's evidence to support both views. The evidence to support the idea of still a move into something like into the halving would be what happened going into the spot ETF, where we sold off right here, and then we still, we actually went all the way back down near the range low and then still popped up to a new high. That would be some evidence to suggest that something like that could happen again. And you could look at sort of the diagonal here and see that we sort of rode that diagonal until after the launch of the spot ETF. Here's a similar diagonal. There's also evidence to suggest that it might not happen. Okay, and that evidence is when the merge happened, when ETH transitioned from proof of work to proof of stake, we actually saw ETH USD top out the month before the merge, right? It topped out the month before the merge, and then during the merge, it actually just put in a lower high on its USD pair, but it put in a higher high on its Bitcoin pair. So there's kind of evidence to support those views. The only what I would look for to sort of get more confident in one view over another is just keep an eye on alt Bitcoin pairs. Okay, they are at 0.41 right now, right back down to the range lows, right back down to the range lows. What's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, is that history looks to be repeating itself. Last cycle, it took exactly 41 weeks for alt Bitcoin pairs to break down after the range low was put in. What week do you think it is? It's week 41. I don't know if it's going to break down this week or not. It could be next week, but I will say this. If it breaks down this week, then there is evidence to suggest the local top for Bitcoin's in. If it breaks down next week and Bitcoin gets some type of bounce into the halving, then you could see something like that within a slightly higher high or something in mid to late April. But it's playing out the same way, right? Look at this. Overlay Bitcoin USD onto the chart. You can see it was when, I need to go on with a longer history here. It was precisely when alt Bitcoin pairs broke down last cycle that marked the local top for Bitcoin USD. So you can see that pretty clearly right here in June of 2024, or June 24th, the week of June 24th of 2019. That's what marked, that meant the local top was in. Okay. Here we are today. We are close, but again, it's been close many times, right? And again, I think it's going to break. I don't know if it's going to break this week or not, but I do think it's going to break. If it doesn't break this week, then we'll see what happens next week, Bitcoin USD. If it breaks this week, then I think that's all she wrote for a while. I think that, it's just a lower high like the merge, and then you end up seeing Bitcoin, crush the altcoin market in a new way that we haven't really seen in a while. But that's why I've been very pessimistic about the Bitcoin market, is because we know that last cycle they didn't break down until after rate cuts arrived, and so I don't really think there's any reason to believe that it'll be different this cycle. And I gotta say, I mean, these views on Bitcoin dominance that I've expressed for a long time, I know they've been met with a lot of criticism, but I do think the biggest critics of it had their reasons, right? It's not like I don't think there was evidence. I could find evidence, in fact, right? If I were to go look at say Bitcoin dominance, let's go look at year-to-date Bitcoin dominance in halving years, right? If I only cared about, if I ignored monetary policy and I looked at dominance without stable coins in halving years, right? 2016, 2020, 2024, normally Bitcoin dominance goes down. But also normally we are in looser monetary policy. So that was the reason why I said that dominance in this halving year is actually going to start off by going up as opposed to down, because unlike 2020, the Fed had not yet pivoted to looser monetary policy. So it's not like there was no evidence to potentially support their view. I think there was. I just think that they were relying on, they were sort of assuming that crypto did not follow monetary policy because it was a new asset class or something. But in reality, it still does. And in reality, a lot of these altcoins just keep on bleeding to Bitcoin because rates are still high and we're still in quantitative tightening, not quantitative easing. So you have to be careful with the altcoin market. Look at this. I mean, in a single day, DOT is down 21%. Avalanche is down 18%. I just did a video on ADA saying that I think it's going to break 800 sats. And when it does, that's when all hell breaks loose. And look at it. Right as it broke 800 sats, what happened to ADA USD? It's now down 20%, right? It's following Matic USD after Matic Bitcoin broke down. It's all happening in the same way as it happened last cycle. It really is. I mean, the only thing that's different about this cycle compared to last cycle, there's two things. Number one is that in this QT rally, Bitcoin put in a new high, whereas in the last QT rally, quantitative tightening rally, it didn't. So that's one difference. The other difference is that the time in the cycle where rate cuts occurred, last cycle they occurred in the pre-halving year. This cycle, they're likely going to occur in the halving year. And so this phase, right, sort of the mid-cycle top, if you want to call it that, right, that phase where Bitcoin pairs bleed and a lot of altcoins put in new lows on their USD pairs, that phase was just simply delayed by 3 quarters, right? Because again, ETH Bitcoin over here broke down in the summer of 2019. Here it looks to be breaking down in April of 2024. Right? It's about a 3-quarter delay. And what's fascinating about this potential 3-quarter delay is that if you were to look at all Bitcoin pairs, everyone talks about alt season, right? Everyone talks about alt season, and they cherry pick these micro caps. Say this is what alt season. Guys, alt season is when Bitcoin dominance collapses, right? It's when it collapses. But the alt season that you're dreaming of, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means it's going to happen a lot later than a lot of people are thinking. And between now and then, a lot of those people that have been so hell-bent on alt season occurring where dominance collapses, they're going to likely get weeded out because they're not going to believe anymore. Once those people finally capitulate those views, then maybe alt season finally arrives. Because alt season is when Bitcoin dominance collapses. Okay, that's what alt season is. These little moves in here that other people try to cherry pick as alt season, this is not alt season. We're talking about practice, right? We're not talking about the game. Right? This is the game. This is practice for the game. So don't tell me that this has been alt season, right? I mean, show me on the chart where alt season has been on the Bitcoin dominance chart. Show me where it has been. It hasn't arrived. It's not that it won't arrive. I do think it will eventually arrive, but I think we have to go through this process first, where we break through the range high, where we break through the range high, we come up, and then maybe spend some time in here, and then later on in maybe 2025, it goes back down the other way. You guys know how April 2021 was more of a significant top than November of 2021. Look at this. Look at this. You see alt Bitcoin pairs. When historically have we seen altcoins do well against Bitcoin? Not this past cycle, but 2 cycles ago, alt Bitcoin pairs went parabolic in January of the bear market year, right? So of 2018, if you were to take a bar pattern, from this breakdown point to a new potential high right here, what do you notice? Right? This high here would come, right, potentially in the early part, late 2025, right? It would start late 2025. So you can imagine, Bitcoin peaking when it normally does, assuming it's not a left translated cycle. If it peaks when it normally does in Q4 of the post-halving year, and then altcoins finally take off, right? That is the alt season that you're looking for. That is the alt season that you're looking for. This is not alt season. This is Bitcoin sucking the liquidity out of the altcoin market. But because Bitcoin USD has gone up, it's caused alt USD valuations to go up. But in reality, the only reason they were going up was because Bitcoin was lifting them up. It wasn't because they were outperforming Bitcoin. Others Bitcoin is down 11% today. Others Bitcoin, by the way, last cycle had a significant drop of about 60-something% before it rallied 60%. Is that not the same thing we just saw? It's the same drop and then a very similar rally, right? But even after that, others Bitcoin, which is everything outside of the top 10, it still dropped another 60% to finally put in its low. Another 60% drop by others Bitcoin would put it all the way back down here. And I know, I've dealt with everyone telling me this can't happen. And maybe they're right. But look how, when it drops, look how quickly it drops. 11% in a day. In one day, it's down 11%. Now, if you look closely at where it is right now, you can see that it actually is corresponding to this support level from October of 2023, right? So there could, in fact, be a bounce. I'm not suggesting that there can't be. There could very well be a bounce by others Bitcoin. And usually, what ends up happening is after you get these big capitulation events like the one we have today, like the one we've been preaching about forever, then the people that ignored it finally get on board. And then what happens is they capitulate the low. And then when it bounces, they get mad at me because they waited too long to make the conversion. So they sell here and then it bounces and then they buy back in and then it collapses later. That's what usually happens. Okay. Because you're not going to, if they weren't already convinced, after the last 2.5 years, it's not like I was going to be able to convince them. The only thing that's going to convince them is the market actually doing what it did last cycle, and that's capitulating at rate cuts. What convinces them is the market actually making the move. But by the time the market makes the move and they're finally convinced, then you usually get a relief rally, like a bounce back up. So you have to be careful. I'm not asking you to go out and convert all your altcoins to Bitcoin today. I said, I said that was the thing you should have done 2.5 years ago. Not financial advice, right? 2.5 years ago. Now, we're getting in close to the end game. It's probably only a few more months of altcoins bleeding against Bitcoin. And in the short term, we it could bounce off of this level. I'm not going to say that it can't. We've seen nothing but bounces forever in this market. And you can see that total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin is right back down to the range lows. So it's sort of setting itself up to potentially either, it could capitulate later this week, but this week's almost over. So I'm not that convinced that has to happen. But it is sort of setting itself up to capitulate maybe the week of the halving, maybe in May. I don't really know, but it is relatively close, right? It is relatively close to getting that final capitulation below. And a lot of altcoins are leading the way. If you're not convinced that alt Bitcoin pairs will eventually break, just look at individual alt Bitcoin pairs. A lot of them are already breaking, right? ADA Bitcoin has broken support. Now, I said yesterday, if you want to prove me wrong, that it's not going to 400 sats and it has to hold 800. It's not holding 800. I mean, this is now at 700. Hell, it went to 687. Now, technically, it hasn't broken down yet because technically this is not a weekly close below 800 sats. If you get a weekly close below 800 sats, then I think the story, it's written on the wall for those who care to look. So my guess is that it will close below 800 sats either this week or next. But until it actually does that, there is still something that I imagine some of the ADA Bitcoin bulls will try to hold on to. Again, it's nothing personal with these altcoins, right? It's just, look at dot Bitcoin. Well, what do you do with something like this? If the altcoin reckoning is based on alt Bitcoin pairs and alt Bitcoin pairs are putting in new lows, that means the altcoin reckoning is not over, right? If dot Bitcoin is putting in new lows, ADA Bitcoin is putting in new lows, Matic Bitcoin is putting in new lows, ETH Bitcoin is putting in new lows. If most of these things are putting in new lows, then it's all part of the same cycle, right? It's all part of the same cycle. Nothing has changed. It's all, in my opinion, it's all based, it comes back to monetary policy. So, can Bitcoin see relief during the halving week or maybe later on in May or something? I ultimately think it just comes down to if alt Bitcoin pairs break down. That's what I think it comes down to. I don't have an answer for you. I can't say yes or no. What I would say is, as long as alt Bitcoin pairs are 0.4 or below or above, as long as alt Bitcoin pairs are 0.4 or above, there is a chance that Bitcoin could go back up. But if you get a weekly close at 0.39 or below, then I think that's it for a while. Just like it was it last cycle for a while. So that's my view on alt Bitcoin pairs. You have to be careful. And guys, I'm telling you, I know you guys, I know a lot of people sort of worship the influencers that are shilling all these altcoins. But I got to tell you guys, a lot of them are just getting paid to do it, right? I mean, I get all the same offers they do, and I just turn them down. And I see those offers come my way. I ignore it or I say no. And then I see those same coins being shilled a couple weeks later by people who didn't say no. So just remember, there's a lot of people out there that are being paid to promote these alts. Just because they're going up for a few weeks doesn't mean that they're going to be around in a year. And that person that you like so much, they're going to be shilling something else next year. So the way to get ahead in the cryptoverse is to understand Bitcoin dominance, right? I know everyone thinks it's a meme, but it really is the key to unlocking the secrets of the cryptoverse. If you can identify a phase where Bitcoin dominance is just going to go up for 2 years, then being Bitcoin heavy is the way to go. As long as you're okay dealing with some of the major downside risks that can come with Bitcoin USD, because guess what? It can also drop 50% or more sometimes. As long as you can deal with that, then you're likely going to be fine over the long haul. But the reality is that while a lot of these altcoins have rallied some, a lot of them are just putting in new lows on their Bitcoin pairs. So you could have just stuck with Bitcoin and you would have made more money than most of these alts. Now, you could cherry pick some of these micro caps if you want to, but they're not going to be around in a couple of years. And by that point, everyone's going to be cherry picking something else. The general trend has always been clear. Bitcoin dominance is going up, all Bitcoin pairs are going down. And there's always a few little shiny micro caps that, someone paid 10 influencers to shill that's going up, sort of make people refute the theory. But if dominance put in a new high today, then the theory was never wrong. It's just that you had to be patient and wait. The theory has never been wrong. It's just been a very, very slow process. So just be careful. I mean, and also, by the way, a lot of this happened to occur as the dollar broke to 106. I've said many, many times, I'm bullish on the dollar going into the summer. And if you're bullish on the dollar going into the summer, then it makes sense to be bullish on Bitcoin dominance, because as the dollar goes up, the denomination of, if you denominate foreign currencies on their USD pairs, the purchasing power goes down. So if you look at something like net liquidity, and you overlay it with something like, Bitcoin USD, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? Like the jaws of liquidity opened long ago, but that's what it normally does until eventually they clamp shut. But here's the thing. While net liquidity does not mimic Bitcoin USD, nor does it mimic the S&P 500, where the jaws sometimes open, but eventually they will likely clamp shut, just like they have previously done. What it does show is that it follows Bitcoin. All Bitcoin pairs follow it. You see that? You see how as net liquidity goes down, so too does the valuation of alt Bitcoin pairs. Liquidity doesn't tell you what the USD valuation is going to do. It tells you that people are going to convert their higher risk assets into lower risk assets until the turn comes, right? And this is, and I'll explain why, what causes Bitcoin dominance to top out and what causes Bitcoin USD to top out. What happens is that, people just convert their high risk assets to low risk assets, right? They convert their alts to Bitcoin. They convert their their Lucid stock, whatever, to Nvidia, right? And they ride all the quote unquote blue chips, right? But then at some point, we reach a threshold where there's no longer enough liquidity in the altcoin market to support the continued rise of the blue chips, or in the micro cap company market to support the rise of the stock market. And again, I don't know if we're there yet. I mean, it really depends on if altcoins break down against Bitcoin. They haven't yet, right? So again, I'm not saying that it has to occur right this minute. It's just something to be aware of in case it does break down. But at some point, when it breaks down, then a source of liquidity that was supporting the market is no longer there. What happens when rate cuts occur that cause Bitcoin dominance to top out? I'll tell you what. So if you look at Bitcoin dominance, why did it top out last cycle after rate cuts arrived? Why did it top out when QE started? If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Why is that? Well, if you're an investor and you're holding off on, and let's not talk about crypto because crypto is pretty much dubious speculation anyways, but let's say you want to buy a company, right? Let's say you want to buy a company. What's a good example? Maybe one of these like EV companies that have just been shattered forever, right? Rivian. Let me look at it. It's just putting in new lows today. Perfect example. Lucid, same thing, right? New lows today. Perfect examples. If you wanted to take a bet on a company like this, or any of the other thousands of companies that are like this, that just keep on bleeding, what do? Do you buy them as rate cuts keep getting pushed further and further out when you don't know if the company is going to go bankrupt or not before the first rate cut arrives? No. A lot of people hold off. Now, some investors will go in and try to speculate on rate cuts coming, and they'll drive the price up, but it just ends up being a lower high as rate cuts keep getting pushed further and further out. But at some point, what will happen is that a rate cut will arrive, right? A rate cut will arrive. And then theoretically, it means that monetary policy is starting to loosen up. Therefore, if someone's going to go out and buy an EV, they can actually get it at a lower interest rate. So then theoretically, the demand for that company, that company's product could theoretically go up, right? The demand for that product could theoretically go up. Therefore, people start to diversify away from the blue chips and towards the riskier plays, right? And towards the riskier plays. And that is why dominance tops after rate cuts arrive. That's why dominance tops after rate cuts arrive, because people start to speculate on riskier stuff more. Now, some of you have been speculating on for a long time, but I'm saying, like, real money that comes in that can actually support the durable support of alt Bitcoin pairs. That money comes in after rate cuts arrive. That doesn't mean that alt USD pairs bottom immediately. And in fact, it's because the concentration moves away from Bitcoin and towards the riskier stuff that causes Bitcoin USD to get that correction. If you look at Bitcoin USD last cycle, you can see that it topped out right before the first rate cut arrived, right? The first rate cut was here in July, and it topped out just before that. Why is that? Well, at this point, if you're an investor and you want to maximize your Sharpe ratio or your Sortino ratio, what you do is you basically have just been Bitcoin heavy forever. Now, some of you guys are full on degens. I tip my hat to you. I was you in a former life. I'm not you anymore. But my point here is that when rate cuts arrive, the backstop for Bitcoin USD isn't the same, because the money that was once supporting it via the conversion of alts to Bitcoin and just people that don't want to buy alts until rate cuts arrive, now that money gets diverted somewhere else, right? It gets diverted some of it gets diverted away from Bitcoin, and it finally starts going to the altcoin market. So because that backstop isn't as strong as it was before rate cuts arrived, the blue chips then get a correction. So while alt Bitcoin pairs bottom as rate cuts arrive, right? You can see right here, alt Bitcoin pairs bottom as rate cuts arrive. Alt USD pairs do not bottom as rate cuts arrive, because while they may have bottomed out on their Bitcoin pair after rate cuts arrived, that doesn't mean they've bottomed out on their USD pair as rate cuts arrive. And then they're just subject to whatever Bitcoin USD does. But then it flips from one to the other, right? So forever, what it has been is alt Bitcoin pairs go down no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, right? But after rate cuts arrive, with the exception of maybe a future parabolic rally by Bitcoin, after rate cuts arrive, after QE returns, what happens? Then the narrative flips. Then it's alt Bitcoin pairs go up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. But we haven't reached that phase yet. We're still in this phase. We're still in the phase where alt Bitcoin pairs haven't actually collectively broken down, but it's the collective breakdown of alt Bitcoin pairs that cause the Fed to pivot, not because they give a flying, you know what about your altcoin, but because it represents a weakness in the retail consumer, in the consumer. So the pricing out of all these rate cuts, we've gone from 6 rate cuts to 2 rate cuts in the last couple of months. The pricing out from 6 to 2. The pricing out of these rate cuts causes alt Bitcoin pairs to capitulate. When alt Bitcoin pairs capitulate, that means the consumer is capitulating. So the pricing out of these rate cuts just leads them to being priced back in, right? Just a couple days ago, the first rate cut wasn't projected to be until September. Now look what's happening. The market, the alt Bitcoin pairs are dropping, and look what's happening to rate cuts. Now it's back to July. What do you think happens if, a month from now, alt Bitcoin pairs are a lot lower? It's not just alt Bitcoin pairs. I think a lot of people think, well, like, you're focusing on crypto. You know how we spoke about Rivian earlier? You see how it's all the way down here? It's putting in a new low. What do you think the Rivian Tesla valuation is doing? Tesla's the blue chip of the EV market, right? Look at it. It's also back to its range low. People say that, like, you can't base Bitcoin dominance on one cycle of monetary policy. It's not. It's based on thousands of years of monetary policy, and during high interest rate environments, high risk leads to low risk. It doesn't mean the high risk stuff can't go up. It just means if it's going up, it's only because the low risk stuff's going up. And if the low risk stuff is what leads the market during QT and high rates, why not just stick with the low risk stuff and leave all the degen stuff for the degen crowd? ETH Bitcoin, it put in a new low today, right? Put in a new low today. Again, it has not technically broken support. It is below it right now, but until you get a weekly close below 0.049, which it is right now, it doesn't mean a thing. So as far as I'm concerned, until we get a weekly close below 0.049, it's not, nothing is set in stone. When it does, if and when it does, that's when I think ETH goes home. And I know it's a meme at this point. I get it. And honestly, it's deserved, right? It hasn't happened yet, but it's close. And if it does, I think that is when it finally goes home after all this time. So we'll see, we'll see if that happens. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, it's all about the regression band, right? You can see last cycle, it finally went to the bottom of the regression band after rate cuts arrived, right? As rate cuts arrived, ETH USD went down. I don't know if we're there yet, right? Like, I can't know. It all depends on if we get a weekly close below 0.049 or not. If we do, then I think it's going down. If we don't, then we kick the can down the road and we just make fun of the idea of ETH going home in the first place for another 3 months. But that's where we are. It's always been playing out this way. It's just been very slow. And arguably, everything has been delayed by about 3 quarters or so. ETH Bitcoin broke down over here, July 2019. Now it's breaking down about 3 quarters later in the cycle, right? In the cycle. So perhaps everyone is overcomplicating everything once again. and talking about, left translated cycles and all that stuff, when maybe it's just going to play out the way it always does. And the mid-cycle top is happening a little bit later this cycle because rate cuts are happening later this cycle, right? Maybe that's all it is. So one thing to look at, by the way, and we've talked about this a lot, is the social stuff, right? Look at the social risk. It's back down to 0.262. Keep an eye on this, right? If this just goes back down like it did over here, if it just goes back down, then you might get this period, right? Like a lull in the market for 3 to 6 months or something, kind of like we got in the back half of 2019, right? You could get something like that where social interest really falls off a cliff for a few months as rate cuts arrive. And then at some point, the money printer comes back on, and then all the retail investors come back. As crazy as it sounds, retail hasn't really come back. The social risk shows that. I mean, they just haven't. The new all-time highs didn't really bring them back. If you look at YouTube views, we added a lot of new channels, but it only goes back for about 3 years. I'll do a video on this later. I mean, you can see, look at YouTube views. They're just trending down, right? They've just been trending down once again. And they're back, back to where they were. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the cryptoverse right now, but I'd like to think that the things that I've outlined for the last 2.5 years, they are playing out. They're just playing out very slowly. I've definitely been wrong about some things. I'm not going to pretend like I haven't been. Bitcoin USD has gone a lot higher than I thought it has, or thought it would. And I still contend that until all Bitcoin pairs actually break down, there's still a chance it could go higher, and that's what I would look for. Look at this chart. If you wake up one day and all Bitcoin pairs are down here, then I think that's it for a while. I think you just kind of pack it up with the altcoin market probably for the next 3 to 6 months. They're not there yet. And I've gotten excited before about this process happening, and I just keep getting let down as we keep bouncing off of this support. But then I go back to last cycle and remember that it was the same thing. And again, it was 41 weeks later, which is where we are right now. It took 41 weeks for it to break down. After the range low was set, it took 41 weeks. So nothing's really changed. I think it's all playing out in a very similar fashion, just, maybe about a 3/4 delay or so. So this was about 41 weeks. And then, from this range low here puts you at around 41 weeks right now. So you can see that it's playing out in a very, very similar fashion. My guess is that, sometime we'll see, in the next few weeks, we'll see this thing break down. I don't know if it's going to be this week, but, I think it'll break down here, and then it'll probably come back up to the breakdown spot and, do something like this, right? I could see it doing something like that and then going up. That's what I did last cycle anyways, right? After it broke down, after all Bitcoin pairs finally broke down right here, you can see that it came back up and back tested. It back tested the breakdown point right there, right? And then it swept it right there. So if we do break down, then, I could certainly see it then getting a bounce later on this year, then maybe even sweeping the high. But yeah, I think it's all playing out. I just think it's been a very, very slow process, and but we're getting there. So Bitcoin dominance is at 55.7%. So let it be known, this is a new high. So the breakout has occurred. If you were to look at this on a monthly time frame, what you'll in fact notice once again is that this pattern played out. We talked about this pattern going into this, right? Of a red February in 2023 and then a big March. This was a red March. I was talking about a big April. The reason why is because this was the same thing, just 10% higher, right? We opened February 2023 at 44%, and then we closed it at 44%. Here, we opened it at 54%, and we closed it just below 54%. It's just 10% higher. Here, we opened it at 44, and then we ended the month at 48. Here, we opened the month at about 54, What happens if we end the month at, I don't know. I mean, can it go to 58% in April? I don't know. I do think it's going to go to 60%. I don't know if it's going to go to 58% in April or not. But you see how quickly dominance can move when it moves. I mean, it leaves no prisoners. When it moves, it clamps down and it does not let go. And you see what happens with these altcoins. Before you know it, all of the debates that everyone's had for the last 2 years, or the last year, about all these altcoins, now they're breaking below their range lows, right? And then the discussion becomes, well, what if it's just a wick and then we get back up? But a lot of these alts just really look bad against Bitcoin, and they've looked bad for a long time. I mean, look at Matic Bitcoin. But you know what I'll say about this? I look at these charts, I look at the breakdowns on alt Bitcoin pairs, and I don't get fearful. The reason, and I learned this from last cycle, the reason is because it ultimately represents an opportunity for those who care to stick around. Okay. So, you've heard me be very bearish on alt Bitcoin pairs for a long time. 2.5 years, I've been bearish on alt Bitcoin pairs. And I'm going to stay bearish on them a little bit longer. But I don't think we're that far away from them finding, whatever lows they're going to find on their Bitcoin pairs. I think we're within a few months of it. So stick around, right? I don't think you'll be disappointed if you stick around. If you stuck with Bitcoin, then you've done much better than most of the altcoin market. Yes, I know some of you guys made a lot of money on some of the meme coins. Congratulations. But when I look at this stuff and I see them finally breaking, retail is capitulating, right? Matic Bitcoin, retail's dropping, retail's capitulating. They're finally giving up. ADA Bitcoin below the range low, ETH Bitcoin below the range low. They're capitulating finally. And now that they are finally giving up, that's when the Bitcoin dominance maxis, as you guys like to call me, that's when we start to get interested. Now, here's the thing that's going to be hard. Here's the thing that's going to be the next phase of the cycle that's going to be kind of hard. Alt Bitcoin pairs can bottom before the alt USD pairs stop going down. Okay. So you could get to a point where alt Bitcoin pairs bottom, and I'm like, all right, guys, Bitcoin at some point in the future, we'll get to the point, and I'll talk about where I'll think that it's top, right? So at some point, maybe in a few months, I will think that Bitcoin dominance might be reaching a local top for a while. We're not there yet, I don't think, but I do think it's coming in the next few months as rate cuts arrive. The hard part is that it's true that altcoins might bottom against Bitcoin maybe this summer, right? And kind of come back down to the range low. And I'm trying to think about, what's going to piss people off, right? So for a while now, alt Bitcoin pairs have gone down, but because Bitcoin went up, alt USD pairs went up, and that made people mad because they even though they would have been better off with Bitcoin, they look at the altcoin, they're like, well, the altcoin went up 2x. I should have bought it. So at some point, dominance tops, and then people get excited about altcoins, but then the altcoin market doesn't go down on its Bitcoin pair anymore, but it becomes a slave to the devaluation of Bitcoin USD, just like it did last cycle. And that, it's hard to know how long it'll last, but that is the next phase that's coming, I think. So over the next few months, I think alt Bitcoin pairs will bottom. And then we just see kind of how deep a potential correction by Bitcoin has to go. Again, that doesn't mean that Bitcoin USD is topped. It's going to be dependent on if alt Bitcoin pairs break down. But that is ultimately what, if it were to play out like last cycle, that's what it would mean. If you look at a lot of these alts, they're really not that far off a lot of their lows, right? DOT's at $7, right? Who cares? It's at $55 over here. It's off the lows, but if Bitcoin is above its high and you have DOT nowhere close to its high. Bitcoin's not above its high right this second, but it's up here at the highs. Compare it to the altcoin market, right? They're nowhere near the highs. Nowhere near the highs. That's why Bitcoin dominance is important. Next cycle, I'm not going to be here preaching this stuff to you guys anymore. I'm just not. I can't do it another cycle, honestly. But I will say, it's the easiest part of the cycle when you look back on it. If you get to a point where you can just take a step back during the mania and say, all right, Bitcoin dominance, if it's at 40%, if you think, if the market is shifting and we're going back to quantitative tightening and high rates, just ride the Bitcoin dominance rally and let the degens worry about the degen stuff, right? Just ride the dominance rally, right? Bitcoin heavy portfolio until dominance tops out. It's the easiest part of the cycle because you hold one coin and it outperforms like 95% of the market, and it's the lowest risk asset. It's the easiest part of the cycle. This part of the cycle is super complicated because there's 1,000 different cryptocurrencies that are being shilled 1,000 different places. You don't know which one's going to do well in its Bitcoin pair. Some of them are, some of them aren't. It's complicated. It's crazy. It's toxic, right? Everyone's here. Retail's here. Retail's not here right now, right? But during dominance, during Bitcoin dominance drops, retail comes in droves. That was you not long ago. Congratulations, you're the new class of crypto investors. But when this phase comes, it's so stressful. This is not the stressful part. This is the part where you just say Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolio until we get to looser monetary policy and ignore everything else. And the reality is that if Bitcoin gets a big drop, which it's not immune to, but let's say it does get a big drop, let's say it goes back down to 30K, 40K, I don't know. If it does, then you would have still been better off with Bitcoin over the altcoin market. Because if Bitcoin drops and it's near the highs while alts are near the lows, then alts put in new lows, right? Think about it. If Bitcoin drops at all and the altcoin market then drops, Bitcoin can afford to drop a lot and still be doing okay. You might not think it's okay because of recency bias, but Bitcoin was trading at 25K half a year ago, right? So even if it were to drop back to this support, which by the way corresponds to the 100-week moving average, which by the way is something we normally test after we break out from it, just like we did last cycle. You see last cycle after rate cuts arrived here, dominant Bitcoin USD topped out and it went back to the 100-week SMA. That's what happened. So if something like that were to happen, people are going to think the world's falling apart. Maybe it is. I don't know. But that's not my base case. And if that happens, where are altcoins, right? So it's not that it has to happen. It's just that if it does happen, you would have just been better off with Bitcoin. It gives you exposure to the upside. It minimizes your downside risk. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go down. In fact, after rate cuts arrive, I think it'll go down a lot for a while, and then it'll probably rally back up as QE comes back in and takes back over. But that's kind of where we are, We'll see what happens next week. I think next week should be an interesting week. If you look at prior local tops by Bitcoin, April does seem to be an important time. Even last year, we had a local top by Bitcoin the week of April 10th, right? The week of April 10th. In 2021, we had a local top the week of April 12th. In 2013, we had a local top the week of April 8th. I don't know what it is about April, but, I guess they say sell it, man, go away. A lot of times April marks a local top for a little while. Last year after April, we then swept the highs before coming back down. But April is an important time. So let's see what happens next week. Let's see if alt Bitcoin pairs break down, which I think they will. And by the way, if alt Bitcoin pairs break down, then it likely means ETH Bitcoin is breaking down. And I've said forever that, well, at least in ITC Premium, that Matic Bitcoin will show, sorry, there's people cutting grass right outside. I've said forever that Matic Bitcoin will show ETH Bitcoin the way. And Matic Bitcoin broke down long ago. Ever since Matic Bitcoin broke down, Matic USD has been down only. If ETH Bitcoin breaks down, ETH USD is probably going to be down only for a while. I mean, you can even see it's the same pattern, right? I mean, it's just more grand. The wedge. You see how ETH USD rallied out of this wedge and then it fell back through it? It's doing the same thing again. It's just on a grander scale as rate cuts or rate monetary policy has been a lot more aggressive this cycle. But what happens if it just falls back through the wedge like it did over there, right? What happens if it just falls through that wedge as we get into May, June, July? I think that's a potential outcome. Now, there is the theory that a lot of people are talking about a left translated cycle. I don't know if I'm a believer in. I'd still say my base case is not left translated, but I know a lot of people believe in it, so I will still continue to talk about that. And there is some evidence to support it. I'm not going to pretend like there's not. If you're to go look at peak ROI Bitcoin, Bitcoin peak to peak, and you look at this cycle compared to last cycle, you might say, well, it looks like we're ahead of schedule. We are by a lot. I mean, think about it. Bitcoin could drop all the way back down here to 30K and still be where it was last cycle as measured peak to peak. But if you're a left translated proponent, then you're probably measuring it from April and you're saying, no, this is where the final parabolic rally comes in, right? I mean, look at it. Look where Bitcoin is. Last cycle, this is precisely where it started to rally again. So I think the answer to our questions about whether it's a left translated cycle or not are going to be answered in the next few weeks. If you get a big rally by Bitcoin, even after alt Bitcoin pairs break down and it goes up, to 80K, 90K or something like that, then yeah, there's a chance that the left translated cycle has legs, but if maybe you only sweep the high or you put in a lower high and then we cool off for a while, then maybe you measure it like this and assume that you can get another rally in 2025. I don't know. I don't know which one it's going to be. I can find compelling evidence for both. Honestly, I can. If you're wondering how I manage it, I've just kept my Bitcoin, my portfolio Bitcoin heavy for the last 2.5 years. It gives me exposure to the upside. It minimizes my downside risk. That's the whole point. I have taken some profits here and there, but not a lot. If we do get a drop down here, then I imagine that would represent an opportunity. If we go up into the halving and we don't, and then it just continues to go up into May, then I think you might be getting a left translated cycle. So let me show you what I mean. So if you look on the daily Bitcoin USD, if you look on the daily here, we had a very similar pattern going into the spot ETF. A very similar pattern. And ultimately what happened is after the spot ETF occurred here, you can see that on the spot ETF, Bitcoin swept the high. So Bitcoin, this is the spot ETF. So Bitcoin swept the high the week of the spot ETF, okay? So if it does the same thing this time where it rallies into the halving, then you look for this move. Does it sort of go up and then sweep the low, right? You see that how it went back all the way down and then swept the low and then went back up, right? So we put in a low right here. It's a very similar thing. Look closely at this. So it rode the diagonal up, and then after the event, the diagonal broke. Same thing, right? We're riding this diagonal up. I don't know if it's going to break today. I would still say until alt Bitcoin pairs break down, there's a chance it might not break down. Alt Bitcoin pairs, as we speak, are at 0.42. They need to be at 0.39 for me to be a little bit more convinced that it's going to break down. So during the last major event, the spot ETF, Bitcoin held the diagonal on the weekly. It had some wicks below it, just like it had right here. It still got a blow off top into the spot ETF. Right? It had a blow off top into the spot ETF. Then after the spot ETF, it had a pullback where it swept this low here. Now, when Bitcoin went back to 39K, I made a video back then and I said, guys, this is still a 20% correction. This is the same correction we've seen. This might be your pre-halving year correction. Look at year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin. Look at 2024, and then you look at 2016, 2020, and 2012. we always had these pre-halving year corrections where it dropped down like 10% below the yearly open, sometimes more. I said at 39K, guys, that could be your pre-halving correction. I know people are wanting more, but you don't always get what you want. You take what the market gives you. And it's gone up, right? All the pullbacks in 2019 were shallow until alt Bitcoin pairs broke down. See? All these pullbacks were shallow pullbacks that did not give people really room to get in. The finally, when we had a larger pullback of 30%, and people finally felt like they could get in, congratulations, they finally bought in before a 9-month bear market started. So that's my point, right? That's my point, is that if alt Bitcoin pairs break down into the halving, then if it sweeps this low down here in April, late April, early May, then you might get a bounce, but then it might just go down. If, on the other hand, alt Bitcoin pairs miraculously hold up, then you might do something like this, where it comes down and then just goes back up, right? But it all depends on if alts break down or not, in my opinion. That's what it depends on, if altcoins break down. There's two paths, and you can see them very clearly in the last two post-halving years. Why would we compare 2024 to post-halving years? Well, I've said before, you know, if last year, if you guys remember, was Bitcoin mimicked halving years. Look at 2023, add the average of 2019 and 2015. Bitcoin was well above it. But if you add the average of halving years, Bitcoin last year looked like halving year returns. So if last year looked like halving year returns, then perhaps 2024 doesn't look like halving year returns, but looks like post halving year returns. And if you look at post halving year returns, look at 2021 and then look at 2017. Two very different paths. If you take the average of 2017 and 2021 and look to see where we are right now, Bitcoin is exactly at the well, maybe a little bit lower, but it's tracking the average of the last two post-halving years. But we know that those 2 years were very different from each other. 2017 went up a lot more into the summer, where 2021 did not. 2021 had a dead cat bounce into May, and then we just did nothing for a while. So which one of these will it follow? I don't know the answer to that question. But as I said before, the answer lies with alt Bitcoin pairs. That's where I think the answer lies. So if it's going to be a left translated cycle, I would imagine that alt Bitcoin pairs hold up longer. If it's going to be a normal cycle, then alt Bitcoin pairs need to break down now, because we don't have that much runway, right? I mean, if it's going to be a normal cycle, alt Bitcoin pairs need to break down now. And I think there is some evidence that that's happening. I mean, a lot of individual alts are already breaking down. ADA Bitcoin breaking down. It's already broken support. Theta Bitcoin still has a ways to go. ETH Bitcoin breaking down. Dot Bitcoin. A moment of silence. It doesn't necessarily mean that Dot is dead, but what I would look for, look, I don't have any Polkadot. I'm just trying to provide a word of non-financial advice for my Polkadot maxis out there. What you would need to look for it to have any hope is, if Bitcoin rolls over, see if Dot Bitcoin can find a low and hold that low. If it can, then there's hope. If it can't, then it's a relic. I don't know what else to tell you. That's just the way the cryptoverse works. Last cycle, I was tracking ADA Bitcoin pretty closely, and I saw that it bottomed out after it broke support. And it dropped 50%. It dropped 50%. And then it bottomed out on a Bitcoin USD downtrend. So that's what you would look for these altcoins that I never talk about. You know, does it find a low in a Bitcoin USD downtrend that it can then hold? Does Matic Bitcoin? I mean, look at Matic Bitcoin. If it drops 50% like ADA Bitcoin did last cycle, that puts it down at like 800 sats. If ADA Bitcoin drops 50% like it did last cycle, it puts it at 400 sats. If ETH Bitcoin drops even 20%, it puts it between 0.03 to 0.04, which is where I've said it's going all along. ETH Bitcoin might be following its own logarithmic regression journey. You can see it pretty clearly if you draw it out. Like this. Right? It's always been there. That's why I've been so bearish on ETH Bitcoin forever. Because my argument is whether you are an ETH maxi or not, it was always probably going to come back down here first before we figure out if it's an oscillator or if it's going up. But that was my view. It was always going to come down here first. Regardless of whether it goes further down or regardless of whether it goes back up, it was always going to go to 0.03 to 0.04 first. Because it has to check back in. It has to check back in. That's my view. If you guys are not subscribed, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. We have about 7,000 people watching. I don't know how many likes we have, but probably not 7,000. We also do have ITC Premium. By the way, prices on ITC Premium are going to go up after the halving. So I guess I'm going to be contributing to the second round of inflation, but the prices are going to go up. We've added a lot of charts. If you want to follow the altcoin market after alt Bitcoin pairs finally break down, we have a website with an asset filter where you can click on altcoins till your heart's content and load up all these different charts on whatever altcoin you're interested in within the first couple of hundred or so. We've got all these charts. We've got a ton of charts for these altcoins. You know, people call me a Bitcoin maxi. How many Bitcoin maxis spent the last 2 years building out a website that tracks thousands, hundreds of different cryptocurrencies and charts that go with them? I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I just ride the Bitcoin dominance rallies when they happen. And you can either accept that and understand why or not. But we do have a website with thousands of different charts on a lot of different cryptocurrencies. And by the way, if you don't care about crypto or you also have equities that you're interested in, we have an equity tab with an equity asset filter that will then load up thousands of different charts for thousands of different stocks. So we've been working pretty hard on this website. It's not just me. We have a team of developers, but check it out. And there are free tiers, right? There are free tiers. So you don't have to pay anything. There's some free tiers. And on the free tier, you actually get some pretty cool stuff like the DCA simulation strategy. And I think you get the beauty of mathematics, logarithmic regression, trendline stuff. So a lot of stuff there for you to sort of play around with. I think you also get the market cap hypotheticals chart. So check it out. Links probably in the description below, but I don't really know if it is or not. Into the cryptoverse.com. Prices are going to go up after the halving. Bitcoin dominance closing in on 56%. If it gets to close at this level, that's a big thing. Okay, it's not there. I mean, we still have a couple of days, but that would be a pretty big thing if it happens. I don't know. What else you guys want to talk about? Do we have any questions? Someone says Bitcoin dominance 56%. Yeah, I saw it go to, it went to 56.35% earlier. I mean, you can see when it moves quickly, right? We spend months arguing about it. And then when it moves, it basically went from 53 to 54 pretty quickly. And then it went from 54 to 55 really quickly, even quicker. And then it basically just skipped over 55 to 56 and went like straight to 56%. I mean, I feel like I checked the chart and it was at like 55.2. And then I pulled it up like 10 minutes later and it was at 56.3. When it moves quickly because altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs, they take the stairs up and the elevator down, right? They take the stairs up and the elevator down. You can see that alt Bitcoin pairs are now at 41%. How's the Sol Bitcoin chart looking? We can go take a look. Sol Bitcoin is down about 9%. So I would say the support level for Sol that's going to want to try to hold is going to be about 20,000 sats. If it doesn't hold 20,000, then it's probably going to go to 12,000. Okay. My base case is that it probably goes to 12,000. But if it doesn't hold 20,000, then I would say it's probably going to go to 12,000 sats. Sol ETH, by the way, it has been a very precarious situation up here because a lot of these altcoins are oscillators against ETH, and Sol ETH is actually kind of at the top of its range. So that might suggest that Ethereum could be, while I'm bearish on ETH Bitcoin, there's a chance that Sol bleeds to ETH, even though ETH bleeds to Bitcoin, right? It's kind of how the cryptoverse works, right? High risk bleeds to lower risk, which bleeds to lower risk, which bleeds to lower risk. All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to read some of the questions we have. All right, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'm not going to scroll up anymore. Someone wants to know about Algorand Bitcoin. I don't even know, but I'm guessing it doesn't look great. I mean, yeah, this is just another example, right? Where, everyone spends a few months thinking that the bear market is over for this altcoin on its Bitcoin pair. You give it another couple of months and it just puts in a new low, So you have to be careful, right? And I know it's a tiring thing, right? But I mean, it's just until looser monetary policy arrives, this is the most likely outcome. Don't take it up with me, take it up with the Fed. It's just the most likely outcome until looser monetary policy arrives. Link Bitcoin. Yeah, Link Bitcoin is interesting. I was sort of looking at it. You can see what I drew out previously. I was sort of speculating that it's very likely going to come back in to back test this. So I'm guessing it's going to, it's currently at 2,100 sats. My guess is that it goes back down to 17 to 1,800 sats at the very least. And hopefully it holds, hopefully it can hold support there. I don't know if it will, but that's what you would look for. I drew this out a couple of weeks ago. We'll see if it holds. Yeah, I made a mistake. I shouldn't be asking you guys about altcoins. I guess everyone's just going to shill their own altcoins. Yeah, my view is that dominance is going to 60%. That's what I think. I think all Bitcoin pairs are going to get absolutely wrecked as dominance goes to 60%. AVAX Bitcoin, total 2 Bitcoin. So total 2 Bitcoin already took out the low. So it's not like this includes ETH. So it probably means that total 3 is total 3 Bitcoin is probably going to take it out too at some point soon. Oh yeah, I meant to say, when does Bitcoin dominance top? I don't know exactly where. I think it is going to 60%, but I will say this. This is my view. And I will try to I will try to expand upon this view in maybe a future Bitcoin dominance video that no one watches, but my view is this. Bitcoin dominance goes up until Bitcoin USD breaks below the bull market support band. That is my view. Okay? So, and there's evidence to back it up. I'm not just pulling this out of thin air, right? My view is that dominance of Bitcoin will go higher as long as Bitcoin USD is above its bull market support band, which again consists of the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA. Once Bitcoin, whenever it falls below the bull market support band, I think dominance tops. That's my view. Why is that my view? because that's what happened last cycle. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. Bitcoin dominance topped here when Bitcoin USD capitulated below the 20-week SMA. And that was when the altcoin market became a slave to Bitcoin USD. Because alt Bitcoin pairs bottomed here, but alt USD pairs went down because Bitcoin USD went down. And then we ended up getting a pandemic recession and then everything capitulated. But Bitcoin dominance topped when Bitcoin USD dropped below its 20-week SMA. So I think that Bitcoin dominance will top more than likely when Bitcoin USD falls below the 20-week SMA. I would say I'm about 65% sure about that. The reason why I don't talk about that view that often is because if Bitcoin USD were to drop below the 20-week SMA tomorrow and the Fed still is nowhere close to pivoting, then Bitcoin dominance could continue to go up even after Bitcoin goes below the 20-week SMA. But that's my general view, is that you could get a situation like this where Bitcoin just kind of bounces around for a while, and then once it falls below the 20-week SMA, then Bitcoin dominance tops. There's no guarantee that Bitcoin USD is top, by the way. Again, I will keep saying that. I don't know if it has. I think the way to know is to just look at all Bitcoin pairs if you're new. If all Bitcoin pairs hold, then Bitcoin USD can get another rally. If all Bitcoin pairs break, then the party's probably over. Do I think we'll get a rate cut before the election? I think we probably will, honestly, because I think Powell. I think they're going to cut rates when the unemployment rate hits 4%, and I think we'll hit 4% before the election. So I do think they will cut before the election. I think they're probably not going to cut very much, but I could see them cutting, a little bit before the election. They probably won't cut in November, but I could see them cutting, a month or two, 1 or 2 months. Between now and then, like 1 or 2 times between now and then. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Bitcoin's going to get another rally up. I've just said before, right? If you want exposure to the upside while minimizing your downside risk, Bitcoin's the way to go. Look at today. Bitcoin's down 5%, 4.5%. It's not down that much. Alts are down 15 to 20%, right? That's what I mean by Bitcoin heavy. Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside and minimizes your downside risk. It doesn't mean there's no downside risk. There's always downside risk. It just means that if Bitcoin drops 5%, the altcoin market gets wrecked. If Bitcoin drops 30%, what do you think happens to alts? And if Bitcoin goes up another 20%, then it still breaks alt Bitcoin pairs down. So there's just not really a scenario where alts do well against Bitcoin until looser monetary policy arrives. Look at ADA USD. It's breaking below the bull market support band. I mean, is it not the same? Someone says the best analyst I know said that because of the ETF, the Bitcoin should eventually be around 2 to 300K. I do think it will eventually hit 2 to 300K. I just honestly, I don't think it's going to hit that level this cycle. I'm not saying it can't go higher this cycle. I don't think it's going to go to 300K this cycle, just like I didn't think it was going to go to 300K last cycle. But yeah, I think it can eventually go there. I think maybe it could get there, like maybe next cycle. It could get to those levels. It's possible. If not next cycle, then I would say I'd be pretty confident of it occurring the cycle after that. I don't think it's going to go to 300K this cycle, but I do think it will get there within 1 to 2 cycles after this one. Once the Fed pivots, how long do you think it will take for this to impact the altcoin market? The Fed pivots because the altcoin market is collapsing. Well, they don't really care about the altcoin market, but again, the altcoin market represents the consumer. So they pivot because retail is capitulating, not the other way around. It's not, the rate cuts don't cause alts to capitulate. It's risk assets capitulating that cause the Fed to pivot. Let's say that at the end of this business cycle, just like as Bitcoin with crypto, could a new asset class be born and main asset will eat it? It's always possible. I think there's always like room for innovation, and there's always things being created and explored. So it's always possible that new asset classes come about. It's not something that happens very common. I mean, normally, you might have like a sector pop up, like you might have a certain type of company pop up, but that's just more stocks, right? You don't often get like a new completely different asset class like crypto. So it is possible, but my guess is that most of the innovation we see in the next few years is just going to be around existing things. Um, if alts break down, how long for them to bottom against Bitcoin? That's a good question. I would say, I think last cycle it took about 2 months. So it might be about 2 months. I don't know. It can be quite pretty aggressive when it happens. So here they broke down June 24th, and then if you ignore the parabolic rally by Bitcoin that occurred later, they bottomed September 2nd, right? So I mean, really, you just had July and August. So it took about 2 months. So once they broke, it took 2 months. So if they break now, then you could theoretically see alt Bitcoin pairs bottoming out by June or July, which is probably, if they do bottom out by June or July, it probably means there's going to be a rate cut around June or July. And right now the market thinks the rate cut comes in July. That can change. What about the rule of the 8-week SMA? I don't think we're below it right now. Maybe we wicked below it, but we're not below it right now. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's go take a look. Yeah, we're still above it, right? I mean, the 8-week SMA is at 66K, 65.9. So we're still above it right now. So keep an eye on that. Also, the other thing that we talked about a lot was USDT dominance. This is one of those trend lines that has a pretty good track record, of I'm just going to leave that chart there, but it has a pretty good track record of predicting these like rotations in the cryptoverse. Gold also had a pretty big breakout recently. We talked a lot about gold getting a breakout. It's probably going to have a correction at some point, but I do think any corrections are just going to be opportunities in gold. I think gold's probably going to go a lot higher over the next like 3 or 4 years. Someone says rate cuts aren't going to happen until September, and that's iffy. It could be right. I just think that if the problem is that as rate cuts are getting priced out, it's causing risk assets to get pretty big corrections, and if that doesn't stop, then those rate cuts might get priced right back on, and they might end up pivoting sooner than people think. All right, guys, I think I'm going to wrap it up. We've been going over an hour. I got to get going soon. But if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. But again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Links in the description below. And do subscribe. It'd be nice to get to 800,000 subscribers before our social activity falls off a cliff. So please subscribe if you're not subscribed. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.